A beggar, clutching her two children tightly, sits huddled on a bustling street corner, invisible to the rushing crowd. Passers-by barely glance her way, their eyes sliding past as if she doesn't exist. Until, suddenly, one man freezes in his tracks. A millionaire. Powerful. Untouchable. But, at this moment, he is utterly shaken. His gaze locks onto her, and recognition crashes over him like a tidal wave. Once upon a time, she was the girl who had everything: charm, beauty, and confidence that made the world revolve around her. She had laughed at him in school, dismissed his awkward attempts to be noticed. And now, she is unrecognizable, broken, desperate, a ghost of the girl she once was. But what he chooses to do next, it's not just unexpected, it's unbelievable. A decision so bold, so shocking, that no one could have seen it coming. Stay with us until the end, because this story is about to turn completely upside down. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Luke Bennett, a man hardened by ambition, accustomed to power and wealth, was making his way across a crowded street when something tugged at his attention, a presence he couldn't ignore. There, on the cold pavement, sat a woman. Her clothes were threadbare, her hair tangled, her face a map of exhaustion and sorrow. Two little girls, no older than 4, clung to her sides, twins. One of them sniffled, wiping her tiny, dirt-streaked hands across her tired eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart. Someone will help us soon." The woman's voice wavered, thick with love, but trembling under the weight of desperation. Luke's breath hitched. Beneath the grime, beneath the suffering, he recognized her. Emily Parker. The girl who had once been the center of every room she walked into. The girl who had laughed, carefree and untouchable, while he had fumbled for words around her. Now, she was a shell of that girl. Fragile, vulnerable, a mother shielding her children with the last remnants of her strength. A wave of emotions surged through him: shock, disbelief, something dangerously close to pain. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement as he stepped closer. Emily's head jerked up, her weary eyes locking onto his. For a second, neither of them spoke. The weight of the past, the unimaginable contrast between then and now, sat like a storm between them. "Luke." Her voice was barely a whisper, as if saying his name might shatter whatever reality this was. He swallowed. "What happened to you?" His voice was steadier than he felt. Emily flinched, instinctively pulling her daughters closer, their small bodies pressing into her for warmth. "It doesn't matter. We're fine. Just go." But Luke's sharp gaze flickered to the girls. One of their tiny stomachs let out a betraying growl. The other little one clung to her mother, wide-eyed and afraid. "You're not fine." His voice was firm now, unyielding. "Come with me." "No. I can't." She shook her head, defiance flickering in her voice, but it was fragile, on the edge of breaking. Luke's jaw tightened. "I'm not leaving you and the girls out here in the cold. No arguments." The twins hesitated, their fear giving way to curiosity as they peered up at him. Emily parted her lips, ready to protest, but the look in his eyes, unwavering and resolute, shattered her last wall of resistance. She gave a weak nod. Minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Luke bent down and gently lifted one of the girls into his arms. Caroline. He'd learn her name later. Emily cradled the other child, Alice. The city streets, the biting cold, the hopelessness, everything faded behind them as the car glided toward his home. Inside Luke's sprawling estate, warmth wrapped around them like a long-lost embrace. The crackling fireplace cast a golden glow across the room. Emily sat stiffly on a plush sofa, her wary eyes flickering between her daughters and the lavish surroundings. Across from her, Mrs. Amelia, the housekeeper, took in the sight of the ragged trio. Her eyebrows shot up slightly, but, ever the professional, she masked her surprise with a brisk nod. Without hesitation, she set to work, hurrying off to prepare a guest room. At the dining table, the twins devoured their meal, warm, nourishing food hastily prepared by Mrs. Amelia. Emily, however, barely touched her plate. "Thank you, Luke. I mean it." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but her gratitude shone in her tear-filled eyes. Luke didn't say anything, just gave a small nod, his face unreadable. Tonight was a start. But tomorrow? Tomorrow he needed answers. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to rewrite the past. The next morning, Luke invited Emily to breakfast. The twins giggled over fresh fruit and toast, their small faces alight with innocent joy. But Emily? She barely ate. When the meal was over, Mrs. Amelia swept the girls away to play, leaving Luke and Emily alone. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "We need to talk." His voice was gentle but firm. "I need to know what happened to you." Emily's fingers knotted together, tightening, her eyes darting away. "It's not something I want to relive." Luke's expression softened. "I'm not here to judge. I just want to help." He exhaled, then added, "Yesterday, I saw you and your daughters on the street. That doesn't just happen overnight. Tell me, Emily, what happened." She inhaled sharply, as if bracing for a wave she couldn't escape. And then, slowly, the dam broke. Late-night fights. A love that had turned toxic. The eviction notice, trembling in her hands. The gnawing hunger, the sleepless nights, the unbearable guilt of watching her daughters suffer while she had nothing left to give. Her voice trembled. "After high school, I dated Joshua Miller. You remember him?" Luke's expression darkened. Joshua. Charismatic. Manipulative. A predator hiding behind charm. "I remember." His tone was clipped. Emily swallowed hard. "I thought it was love. But when I told him I was pregnant, he disappeared. My parents couldn't help much. I tried, I really did, but I lost my job, bills piled up, and then we had nowhere left to go." Luke's chest tightened. The image of her, once so full of life, reduced to a woman fighting tooth and nail to survive, made something inside him ache. "Why didn't you call me?" His voice was softer now, but beneath it, something raw, something almost hurt. Emily let out a shaky breath. "I was ashamed." Her voice, "That's strength, not shame." Emily's breath hitched as his words settled deep within her. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but this time, she didn't turn away. There was something in Luke's gaze, something steady, something unwavering. Not pity, not judgment, but admiration. And that made her heart ache in an entirely different way. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Luke hesitated, searching for the right words. And then simply, honestly, he spoke. "Because I care. I always have." That night, as Emily tucked Caroline and Alice into bed, Luke's words echoed in her mind. A flicker of hope, small but undeniable, lit up inside her. Accepting his help meant facing everything she had buried, confronting every fear that had held her back. But for her daughters? She would try. The next morning, the mansion brimmed with a sound it hadn't heard in years, laughter. The twins, dressed in brand-new clothes laid out by Mrs. Caroline, raced across the plush carpet, their giggles filling the grand hallways. Emily stood nearby, arms crossed, watching them. Gratitude swirled inside her, tangled with something heavier. Unease. She didn't belong in this world of polished elegance and effortless wealth. Every act of kindness from Luke, every warm meal, every thoughtful gesture, it unsettled her. Not because she wasn't thankful, but because accepting it meant acknowledging how much she had lost. But for Caroline and Alice, she swallowed her pride. After breakfast, the twins dashed outside under Mrs. Caroline's careful watch. Emily lingered in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up as she scrubbed the dishes. The repetitive motion gave her a sense of usefulness, a purpose, even in a place where she felt like an outsider. Luke appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, amusement tugging at the corner of his lips. "You don't have to do that." Emily barely glanced up. "I can't just sit here and do nothing." Luke sighed, shaking his head. "Fine. But first, do the girls need anything? Clothes? Shoes?" She hesitated. Then, reluctantly, "Yes, but then let's go shopping." She turned sharply.
No.
That's too much. Luke's faint smile grew. I insist. An hour later, they found themselves in a bustling downtown boutique, shelves lined with soft fabrics and bright colors. Caroline and Alice weaved between racks, their eyes shining as they took in the endless choices. Mommy, can I have this? Caroline held up a sparkly dress, her little fingers clutching the delicate fabric like a treasure. Her eyes, wide and hopeful, peered up at Emily. Her throat tightened. Yes, sweetheart. Luke watched from a short distance, arms folded, a quiet satisfaction settling over him. For the first time, he saw something flicker in Emily's eyes, something he hadn't seen since the day he found her on the street. Hope. The days after their shopping trip passed in a soft blur of quiet moments and small joys. The twins paraded around the mansion in their new clothes, turning the long hallways into their own personal runway. Their laughter echoed through the grand space, filling the silence that had once lived there. Emily, too, changed. She found herself smiling more easily, the weight on her chest lifting, though never fully gone. Each morning, Luke joined them for breakfast, something that surprised even him. It had started as politeness, a routine.
But now?
He found himself looking forward to it. Emily noticed his gaze lingering on the girls as they spoke excitedly about their imaginary adventures, his expression soft in a way she hadn't expected. He was no longer just a host. No longer just the man who had helped them. He was becoming a part of their little family. And yet, behind Luke's easy smiles, something else simmered beneath the surface. A thought that wouldn't leave him. How had Emily ended up on the streets? And more importantly, who had left her to fight alone? The name Joshua Miller gnawed at him like an open wound. A ghost from the past he could no longer ignore. One evening, after the twins had drifted into peaceful sleep, Luke stood by the window, phone in hand. The darkened sky stretched beyond the glass, but he barely noticed it. His own reflection stared back at him, his jaw tight with unspoken resolve. He needed answers. For Emily, for the girls, and for himself. Days later, morning sunlight bathed the twins as they slept, their small chests rising and falling in perfect harmony. Emily stood beside them, watching, a mixture of hope and determination settling into her bones. Downstairs, Luke greeted her with a warm cup of coffee, his smile easier now. Now that they're settled, let's talk about you. Emily blinked. Me? He leaned forward slightly. What if you went back to school? Her stomach twisted. I can't afford that, Luke. He waved off the concern. I'll cover it. Consider it an investment in your future and in theirs. His